10 abilities removed for being too quickly, removed quickly for being too powerful.
Sometimes in World of Warcraft, they'll introduce new abilities or talents to the game, which are too difficult to balance, so they just completely alter them to something else, or remove them completely from the game. And in this list, we'll go over which one of these abilities were removed the fastest in this way.
Okay.
And at number 10, we have Void Tendrils, which existed in the game for 2 expansions before being removed. And this will be
Oh, dude! Yo, I fucking hated this shit. Oh my god, dude, I fucking hated this so much, man. I forgot, this was like Cataclysm, wasn't it? Oh, dude, this made me so fucking mad.
Absolutely the longest out of all of the abilities.
I get kited like a bitch.
Since the ability was still in the game for 2 expansions, even after it was heavily altered and nerfed. You see, what Void Tendrils did was it was a very innocuous priest CC ability, which would root nearby targets to the priest for the standard PvP duration, or 20 seconds in non-PvP scenarios.
Yeah.
And what was unique about these roots was that they did not break on damage, like pretty much every single other root in the game, because they had a little gimmick to them.
You had to kill them.
You see, in order to break the roots of Void Tendrils, you had to literally attack and kill the Void Tendrils which were rooting you in place.
I thought that was really cool. Like, theoretically, that sounds really cool, but as a warrior, that sucked. Like, it was the most annoying fucking thing that you could ever imagine. Because you had to, like, switch targets and swap over, and it was like, basically totems.
And since the root was counted as a target you had to defeat, they couldn't be dispelled either, which gave them all kinds of advantages over normal CC abilities.
Yeah.
This ability basically removed melee characters from the fight, and allowed you to attack them with impunity from range, which is kind of why other roots break on damage. They could also be considered a full form of protection, as the melee character would have to attack the Void Tendrils for a bit if they wanted to break them.
Exactly.
Which meant they had to stop their attack on anything else. The Void Tendrils were also pretty beefy, as they had 20% of the priest's health, so it was like attacking through a fifth of a player's health bar in order to get through them, which meant you couldn't easily one-shot them to get out quickly. And they of course had a short 30-second cooldown, and could affect up to 5 targets, and was one of the first talents a priest could pick up, and could be used alongside other CCs they had.
They weren't like, it wasn't crazy in PvE, it was really good, but it wasn't crazy. But it was like ridiculously fucking annoying in PvP.
Funny thing is, Void Tendrils were not
the NPCs
considered
would attack
overpowered, because this all happened in Mists of Pandaria. And Mists of Pandaria is when PvP crowd control was at its most power-crept version in the game's history.
I remember back in Mists of Pandaria, I watched a video of this guy that sat in a CC chain in a 2v2 match for 2 minutes. 2 minutes. This dude was locked out of the fucking game. Like, I feel like back in Mists of Pandaria, I almost wanted Blizzard to refund me a penny every single time that I got stuck in a CC chain. Because I'm paying to play the game, you know? And I can't even play the game. At a certain point, like, you literally can't fucking even play the game. It's insane.
It's kind of the point in WoW that they never wanted to get to again.
Yeah.
With every class having a ridiculous amount of CC. And since it existed in this time period, it kind of flew under the radar a little bit. Only a little bit, because as soon as Warlords of Draenor hit, the ability received all kinds of nerfs.
It
was moved to a higher level in the talent tree, so you can no longer get it at low levels. They lowered the health of the tendrils in half, and made it so any damage you dealt to the rooted target also dealt damage to the tendrils, so you could no longer attack melee targets caught in it with impunity. And all of these nerfs made the ability kind of useless, which is why they later buffed the HP of the Void Tendrils by 30%, and then eventually just removed them in Legion rather than try to deal with this problem of an ability.
See, I told you Legion was a good expansion. See, it proves it right there. Shadow Priest got fucked.
So really, it only existed in its prime for one expansion, and only lasted as long as it did because everything else was kind of broken in the same time period.
Makes sense.
And at number 9, we have Glyph of Unleashed Lightning. This was a glyph that only existed for 1.25 expansions before it was just removed and converted into something that
wasn't
was
this like
useless.
in Mists of Pandaria or Cata?
You see, what this glyph did, which was added to the game in late Cataclysm, was simply allow shamans to cast the lightning bolt spell while moving.
See, like, that's basically like what it was. Is like Vanilla WoW, it's like you had part of your class. Burning Crusade, you had more of your class. Wrath of the Lich King, you had all of your class. Cataclysm, you had some of somebody else's class. Mists of Pandaria, you had all of everybody else's class and all of your class, and also you were able to cast all of your abilities while you were moving at any time. Like, that's basically what happened. And, like, it just got to the point where, like, everybody just had everything, and it was insane. Like, the game was cool in a way, but, like, some of the, like, this was fucking ridiculous. It was fucking ridiculous.
And that's it. It just allowed them to cast their filler spell on the move at the cost of giving up one of their glyph slots. You see, in the time period, a lot of casters were getting a lot of mobility, and this is when they were starting to loosen the rules and abilities that let casters do stuff on the move. And this glyph was kind of an experiment of letting one of the casters use their filler spell all the time on the move just to see how it affected the game.
Yeah.
I assume, because Warlocks could also get Killjaden's Cunning very shortly after, which also allowed them to cast filler spells while on the move. Hunters were given the ability to cast
That was a really great ability, man. I love that ability. It was super fun, very exciting. Primarily, yeah, it was fucking awesome. I love that shit.
Everything on the move, and priests were given shadowy apparitions, which in their very first form had a super increased chance to spawn if they were on the move. And what do you know? Everybody loved the glyph.
Big surprise.
Every shaman took it. It was probably one of the most
When would you
used
ever
glyphs
not take
ever.
that as the glyph?
Well, that might be a little bit of hyperbole.
Yeah.
Most classes only had a handful of good glyphs anyway, but you kind of get the point.
Well, that's what it was. There was like 12 glyphs in the game, and one of them was like you can cast Lightning Bolt while moving, and the other one was Lightning Bolt has a different animation. So guess which one people went with? It was like the glyphs were... They were not necessarily amazing. Like, there were obvious, like... They're the 3 best glyphs that you would go with, and then you just always use those things. Like, I wish that there were good glyphs in the game now. Like, I liked glyphs. I thought they were really interesting. But making all of the glyphs cosmetic is probably a good idea. Like, realistically, making them all cosmetic is probably a better idea than what they had before.
It was so good that they had to nerf it a little bit. In Mists of Pandaria, it was changed to actually have a downside to the cast, where it would impose a 5% haste penalty if you cast Lightning Bolt while moving. This was supposed to make it so that you couldn't do full damage while on the move, and had to take some kind of hit for that
5% less damage, 5%
but it wasn't really enough.
Yeah.
Shamans kept moving while doing their full rotation, so only
insane.
had to sit still for a handful of moments.
Exactly.
But for the most part, this glyph made them one of the most mobile casters of the game. And since Warlocks had to take up one of their precious talent points in order to gain similar mobility, they decided to remove it from the game in patch 5.3, and instead replace it with Glyph of Lightning Shield. And Shamans have been sad ever since, and always ask for the return of the glyph in some way. Warlocks also lost the ability to cast while moving. Blizzard changed their mind hardcore after Mists of Pandaria, and kind of took away all casters' abilities to do stuff while moving.
That was a good thing. I feel like the caster, like the idea of being a caster should be that you cast. Like, there should be some abilities that you can cast and you can move, but the majority is that you stop moving and you cast. Because really, if you can move and cast, you're basically a melee character that just has a longer range. I don't know. I thought it was a good decision. Like, sitting there and, like, being smart about the way that you cast, I think the way that it should work is that it's harder to cast an ability, but if you get the motherfucker off, it does a lot of damage. That's how I think it should work. Hunters? Yeah, hunters are like an exception, right? I mean, you don't want to have every class like a hunter.
Except hunters. They just kind of made one of the specs have to stand still for a bit instead. So, since the glyph was added in the second patch in Cataclysm, and then removed in the third patch in Mist of Pandaria, it was only in the game for about 1 1/4 expansions, give or take.
Yeah.
I'm not doing actual math on this, since this is the only ability on this list which was added and removed mid-expansions.
Yeah.
And at number 8, we have Clash, a Brewmaster Monk ability. This ability, added with the Monk class when they were introduced to the game, simply allowed the Monk to charge a target, while also death gripping the target to their location.
Really?
And then they would meet like halfway and then stun everything else around them at the point of impact.
Dude, I don't remember that at all.
So it was half a charge, half a pull, and was an excellent tool for monks to give them even more maneuverability, as they were one of the most mobile classes in the game at the time.
Really?
However, With the shift in Warlords of Draenor to remove a ton of class maneuverability and CC...
Wait, so they're adding it back? Because, yeah, I was about to say, this guy's in the Shadowlands beta right now. So they're adding this overpowered ability back for monks?
Clash kind of hit the cutting room floor because it was both of those things. It could be considered a gap closer and ACC, because that's exactly what it was. So this ability only existed in the game for one expansion.
Right.
Now, just like Void Tendrils, it wasn't really causing any problems, but that's because it was Mist of Pandaria and everyone was broken.
Yes.
Currently, Blizzard has plans on returning...
That was one of the good things about Mist of Pandaria, is because everybody was so brokenly overpowered, they could just add a new overpowered ability into the game, and nobody would care, because it's like, oh yeah, I already have 5 of my own abilities to counter it. Who gives a fuck?
To the game in Shadowlands, as monks have the ability on the beta, and it's only a slightly nerfed version of its Mist of Pandaria counterpart, as it still basically does the exact same thing. It no longer has an AoE stun component to it like it used to. Instead, it roots all targets that are nearby when you clash with your target. And at number 7, we have Symbiosis.
This was so cool. Like, this ability was fucking awesome. I don't know why they got rid of this. Like, this was a badass ability. It was, like, unique. It was different for everybody. There was, like, so much to it. That was awesome.
This is a druid ability that only existed in Mist of Pandaria. You might be seeing a theme here with all of these removed abilities, and was only in the game for one expansion. And I don't think I've ever seen an ability balanced and fixed and tuned as much as Symbiosis, despite the fact that it was only around for a single expansion.
Well, yeah, they literally give you other classes' abilities. That's what I was saying. It's like in Mist of Pandaria, you then become another class on top of your class. It's fucking insane.
Because what it did was probably more than any other ability in the game's history. Essentially, it allowed the druid to learn one of 40 new abilities, depending on which class they use the ability on. I'll have a whole list of them on screen, and it would also grant the ability to another class it was used on.
That is crazy.
It was an ability that required a flowchart to make best use of, and it was a nightmare to balance. They constantly made changes and adjustments to it throughout its entire history, before just giving up on it and removing it in the very next expansion.
This is math
If anything,
detected.
I'm sure they wanted to remove it even faster than that, but since it was one of the hallmark abilities that druids were supposed to obtain with...
Well, it wasn't just a hallmark ability, it was a cool as fuck ability. Like, this is a badass ability. All things considered, this was really, really cool. And it's like, it's always... Like, that's always going to be, like, the balance between, like, making something really fucking overpowered versus making something really good. Or like, really fun or, like, really balanced.
That new expansion, they were probably obligated to stick it out until the end of the expansion. This one was definitely removed because of balancing nightmares, and not because it was overpowered. I'm sure most groups thought it was just a fun, neat little thing druids could do, that most people never really bothered with. It didn't really impact World First races that much, and since everything else was broken in PvP in that expansion, it didn't really stand out on that front either. Now, I actually bring this ability up a lot in other videos that talk about removed abilities, because this ability was so unique that it just kind of gets brought up a lot in these kinds of things. And at number 6, we have Gladiator's Resolve. This was a town that only existed for one expansion in Warlords of Draenor, and basically gave Prot Warriors a new stance called Gladiator Stance.
Yeah, I remember Gladiator Stance was
increased the damage reduction of their defensive stance by 5%.
I like Gladiator Stance a lot.
If they wanted some use of it outside of its new Gladiator Stance. But while in Gladiator Stance, which replaced...
Gladiator Stance was fucking amazing. The reason why Gladiator Stance was trash is because... there was like a stat in Warlords of Draenor called bonus armor, or like bonus something, and because bonus armor increased your attack power if you were Gladiator Stance, it made it to where you did way more damage with bonus armor gear, and it made Gladiator Stance warriors compete with tank warriors for damage, and that's what made them so bad. That's what made it so annoying. It was amazing but trash. Yeah, it's like, if they made it to where Gladiator warriors were not competing for tank gear against tanks, I think it would have been fine.
Placed a battle stance. It increased their damage by 5%, gave them a 50% increase to their mastery, and replaced their shield with a shield charge ability.
This was pretty fucking fun.
And there was also a little caveat to the ability where you could not change into or out of the stance during combat. So if you picked Gladiator Stance, you were stuck in it. So why was this ability removed? Well, it essentially gave Protection Warriors 2 specs within a spec. in the same way that Feral Druids used to work before they were split into 2 separate specs, Guardian and Feral for their tank and DPS builds. For Protection Warriors, there was the normal defensive stance build.
Okay, just 1 second. I do want to say, Gladiator's Resolve and the Gladiator stance was really, really cool. I like this ability a lot, and this is basically like whenever you're thinking of like an ancient like Roman or like a Spartan warrior, you're not thinking of some guy with a giant 2-handed weapon. You've got some guy with a fucking short sword and a shield. So Gladiator's Resolve was supposed to be like kind of pursuing that fantasy, but the problem was that like the functionality of the class just didn't really work.
And then the Gladiator stance build, which did more damage, but it wasn't supposed to be competitive with a pure damage build.
Exactly.
Even though with the right gear and theory crafting, it could do pretty well for itself.
It's not that it could do pretty well. It was the best warrior spec in the game. At the beginning of Highmaul, it was the best warrior spec in the game. Gladiator stance was. It was insane. I remember having to play it, and it was so annoying because you had to hit like fucking like 120 abilities. What was like the APM for the class was like super, super fucking high.
People loved the Gladiator stance, as it was essentially providing a force spec to warriors. But in Legion, they were removing stances from the game, and it was a nightmare to balance.
Yeah.
So instead of trying to incorporate it into the game as a force spec like they did with Druids, they just kind of got rid of it since it wasn't really that different anyway. And at number 5...
It was disappointing, man. It really was. I actually really enjoyed the ability, and I wish that they had tried one extra expansion to make it a little bit better. Like, I feel like a lot of times they have something like Symbiosis or something that they could, like, maybe water down and make a cool ability, but they just, like, kind of throw their hands up in the air and they're like, you know what, fuck it, let's throw it away. It sucks.
We have Dematerialize, a monk passive ability which only existed in the game for one expansion in Mists of Pandaria. And what this ability did was, when you were stunned, you would phase out of existence temporarily for 2 seconds, causing attacks to miss you on a 10-second cooldown.
Oh, dude! Oh my god! This is... Oh, dude! I remember this one! Oh my god! Dude... And like, I remember you'd have warriors that would like stun them and you'd be killing them and then they'd go fucking invulnerable. This is why I hated monks, okay? People are like, it had a 10-second ICD. Like, this is like you stun them. 8, 9. You do it again and they just fucking dematerialize again. It was so fucking bad, man. Like, I hated this fucking ability so much. It actually made playing in Mists of Pandaria against monks so unfun. It was the worst ever.
And what this essentially meant was a monk was all but immune to abilities for 2 seconds after they got stunned, which kind of made them softly immune to stuns, as in PvP situations, you would generally dump all of your damage onto a target as soon as they got CC'd. And it would be very difficult to remember that you had to hold back on monks specifically for 2 seconds after a stun took place, so that all of your cooldowns wouldn't miss.
It was so bad.
It was such a good passive ability that it was changed pretty quickly within the expansion, and given all kinds of nerfs before they just removed it from the game completely as soon as they could in the next expansion.
Yes.
And it's probably one of the strongest passive abilities that has ever been added to the game.
It was.
Because of just how huge being immune to attacks for 2 seconds after being stunned is.
It's fucking broken.
Since that's one of the main ways people crowd control someone before laying in heavy damage.
It was fucking broken, dude. Like, it was insane. I don't even know what else to say about it besides that it was just fucking insane.
And at number 4, we have Prismatic Crystal, a mage talent that only existed for one expansion in Warlords of Draenor. What this ability did was, on a cooldown, you could place a crystal on the floor next to a target, and then you could attack it for 12 seconds. Every time you attack the crystal, it would pulse the damage to everything around the crystal for...
I actually really like this ability. I know some people weren't like big fans of it, but I really like the ability because it rewarded placement, it rewarded planning, and yeah, obviously like for bosses it was kind of boring, but it was like that extra thing that you could do. It's like I'd like to see Prismatic Crystal come back. because it was a great PvE ability that good players could take advantage of, and bad players were not able to. And I think that's kind of like the hallmark of like if an ability is good or not, is if it can separate good players from bad players.
Exactly the amount of damage you put into it, and it would also increase the damage dealt to the crystal. So it could essentially turn all of your abilities into an AoE for 12 seconds. Now, funny thing about the crystal,
awesome.
It replicated all of the damage you dealt, including the damage from trinkets. So, towards the end of the expansion, mages were able to use this AoE trinket called the Prophecy of Fear, which would put debuffs on the target for 10 seconds that would pulse AoE damage every time you dealt damage to the target that had the debuff. So, if an arcane mage just pumped a whole bunch of arcane missiles that proc the hell out of that trinket, it would deal its AoE damage around the crystal, and then deal the damage again from the crystal itself, replicating the damage, which essentially allowed them to double up on the trinket's damage, and allowed groups of mages to kill bosses in under 30 seconds at the end.
So this was how it worked, right? Is like back then, you had like your legendary ring, and because legendary ring like made you do so much damage, watch how fast. This was a mythic raid boss. Just keep that in mind. This right here is a mythic raid boss.
The expansion, when they kind of overgeared this stuff anyway.
Look at that.
And the crystal wasn't a very well-liked talent. It was good and kind of overpowered if you optimized for it, but it was kind of clunky to use and required a target to be
mythic
near it
raid
for 12
boss right
seconds to get the full benefit out of it.
Oh, and by the way, that was a current mythic raid boss. Not like a mythic raid boss in the first tier and you're in the last tier. No, that was a current mythic raid boss. Like, I'll show you guys some videos. I'll go back. I want to watch it again. Watch this motherfucker's health. This is Iron Reaver. Iron Reaver.
And allowed groups of mages to kill bosses in under 30 seconds at the end of the expansion, when they kind of overgeared this stuff anyway.
Look at
and the crystal wasn't a very well-liked talent. It was good and kind of overpowered if you optimized for it, but it was kind of clunky to use and required a target to be near it for 12 seconds to get the full benefit out of it.
Yeah, I
so
like the
not too many
ability.
people were super sad to see it go away when it was removed in the very next expansion, so they no longer had to try to balance it.
Yeah, I
honestly,
thought it was
they
fun.
could kind of balance it pretty easily by just allowing only mage abilities to work on it.
Yeah, probably.
Or only certain kinds of abilities to be transferred through, similar to how Atonement works for Disc Priests. And at number 3, we have Aspect of the Fox, version 2.0. which was added to the game in Warlords of Draenor in one of the earliest patches.
Dude, this was so fucking OP, man. This was so fucking OP. Because what you would do is you needed like 3 or 4 hunters for Mythic Blackhand, and the strategy used to be to spam Aspect of the Fox in the first phase, so you could just avoid all of the AoEs on the ground, and you would have the entire raid rotating around fighting the boss. It looked really, really cool, but this shit was broken, man. This was absolutely fucking broken.
Before being removed 2 patches later in 6.2. Now, Amplify Magic also makes this spot on the list since it kind of fit in the same theme as Aspect of the Fox. You see, in Warlords of Draenor, they wanted to give a couple of the pure DPS classes utility inside of the raid in the form of raid-wide cooldowns. So, what they did for mages and hunters was give them 2 abilities that they no longer had and retool them to work in a way similar to how they used to work when they were part of their classes.
Yeah.
Aspect of the Fox was the aspect hunters used to have that would allow them to cast while moving.
They got rid of that
before they
real
just
quick.
let them cast while moving baseline and kind of remove the
Real
idea
quick.
of aspect dancing from the game. And Amplify Magic was a very niche ability
I
that
thought aspect dancing was like kind of like a cool thing in classic WoW. Like, for example, whenever you had it back in the day, you would like go between like aspect of the hawk and aspect of the cheetah to like kite somebody. But I don't really know if like all of those kinds of things are like things that you need to carry forward. Like at a certain point, it's okay. Like, I don't think that you should have to change aspects rotationally. Like, that sounds stupid to me. But it should be something that you can do if you're in like a really niche situation and you want to be able to take advantage of it. That's like kind of my take on it based off of, my time playing Hunter. Mike Hawk? No, aspect of Hawk, not my aspect of Mike Hawk.
mages could cast on people that would increase the amount of healing they received, but also increase the amount of magic damage they took. So what the new raid-wide ability hunters received did was on a 3-minute cooldown, it would allow everyone in the raid to cast while moving for 6 seconds. And for mages, on a 2-minute cooldown, it would increase the healing everyone in the raid received by 10% for 6 seconds. And these are both good effects.
I forgot about Amplify Magic.
Why were they removed from the game? Well, for 2 reasons. For one, hunters and mages didn't like using them. They didn't play those classes in order to give the raid buffs. They wanted to just focus on dealing damage.
Yeah, because they're fucking selfish. Like, see, I don't know what else is like, exactly. Yeah, these are, no, really, they didn't want to use the abilities because, here, think about it like this. Said no one ever? I would not want to use it as a hunter. Here's why. If I use the ability that makes everybody else do more damage, that means that I comparatively do less damage. Because if they do more damage, and even if I'm doing more damage than they are, so like if I'm doing 10,000 DPS and they're doing 8,000 DPS, and then me using a cooldown makes them go up to 9,000 DPS, now they're only 1,000 DPS lower than me, and my ego isn't as big as if they were 2,000 DPS lower than me. So that's why you don't want to use it. Because you want to make sure you want to kill the boss, right? But beyond killing the boss, you want to keep everybody as low as possible, except for you.
And the abilities didn't increase their damage at all. They were helpful to the raid, sure, but they weren't exactly excited about being able to use them.
Yeah, fuck them.
And for 2, Aspect of the Fox was really strong. It allowed raiders to kind of trivialize certain mechanics by allowing all of the casters and healers to move for that incredibly limited time duration. Sure, Amplify Magic was good too. It's always nice to have extra healing, but the ability to give everyone in the raid movement while casting was kind of broken. And since players didn't really like using the ability anyway, they just kind of removed them rather than try to rebalance them to something that wasn't game-breaking.
That's probably a good idea.
And Amplify Magic just kind of got taken down alongside Aspect of the Fox, even though it wasn't as broken. So, while technically these 2 abilities did exist in the game for a long time beforehand, they were essentially 2
they got changed to where they were just completely fucking, they were like completely like broken at the end, right? Aspect of the Pack. Dude, remember whenever you had a hunter with Aspect of the Pack in an LFR run and they wouldn't turn it off? I remember like in Throne of Thunder. So in Throne of Thunder, you know, like whenever you'd go from the first boss to the second boss and there was like the wind area? Well, there would be a hunter that would keep on Aspect of the Pack. And then the moment that like somebody would get hit, they would try to move out, but since they were dazed, they couldn't move out of the wind fast enough, and the wind would just push them off the edge. It was one of the funniest fucking things that I ever saw. Like, I loved that, man. Aspect of the Daze, yeah, it was really, really, really annoying.
New abilities added to the game that were just given the names of old abilities that used to exist.
Yeah.
So they definitely count for this list, and only existed in the game for 2 patches. And at number 2, we have Blood Fear, a warlock town that only existed in early MoP for 2 patches.
Really?
This ability was in the game for a slightly shorter amount of time than Aspect of the Fox,
I don't remember this at all.
Which is why it gets a higher spot, despite them both technically being in the game
I don't remember this one at all.
Each. You see, what this ability did was it would replace the Warlock Fear ability with a new ability called Blood Fear, which basically did the exact same thing. It would fear a target for 20 seconds.
It was instant.
However, with 2 differences. It had a 5-second cooldown, where the original fear had no cooldown, and it was instant cast.
That is
instead of having a cast time.
Like, theoretically, that sounds like a badass ability. Like, I'll say that. Yeah, that sounds like a badass ability. I really, really like the idea of it. It's really cool.
And the fact that this version of fear was instant cast was kind of broken. Of course, this ability existed in Mist of Pandaria.
Instant cast CD.
This ability is kind of the hallmark of how crazy PvP was in that expansion.
Oh, it was fucking
where
insane.
They thought giving warlocks an instant fear was an okay thing to do.
Yeah, fuck it.
Here's the thing about spammable CCs with no cooldowns. They're kind of balanced around the counterplay of that cast time, and the fact that they have diminishing returns. So, with a cast time, there is the opportunity to play around it by running behind a pillar, or just interrupting the ability.
Exactly.
And even then, those abilities are super strong. And
well, that's the other thing, right? Is that this is what I don't like about healing now. Is like healing now is always fucking instant. Like healers can go up 30% health, 40% health with an instant cast. What the fuck is the counterplay to that? What's the counterplay that you just instantly cast an ability? What the fuck? I hate that, man. I absolutely fucking hate that. Do more damage? That's trash gameplay. The absolute trash gameplay. Healers should have to heal. They should have to cast abilities that can be interrupted. And then DPS should have to either interrupt those abilities or stun them and do more damage. There's nothing fun about just like attacking a target that's randomly healing to full health that you have no control over outside of your stun window that's every like half a minute.
Historically, classes that have spammable CCs, like warlocks and mages, have seen tons of play in arena and other PvP because of how strong those things are. So if you take an already strong ability like Fear and make it even stronger by removing the only counterplay option you have to it,
it's good.
Then what you have is one of the most broken CCs in the game's history, which is called Blood Fear.
Yes.
Not the most broken, mind you. That would still probably be Glyph of Death and Decay, the glyph that early Wrath Death Knights used to have, but definitely on—
Dude, Season 5 Wrath DKs, man. Holy fuck, I forgot all about that. Man. Oh my god. Like, it would literally just fear you. It was so bad. Like, Death and DK, like, Death Knights were so broken in Season 5. It was absolutely just, it was the worst, probably the most overpowered class in any season, in any expansion period.
The same scale. Basically, the ability was so strong that it was just removed from the game in the middle of the expansion that had the most amount of CC out of any expansion. And you know something is broken when it's considered too strong for Mista Pandaria PvP. So, when they removed the ability from the game, they replaced it with an ability called Blood Horror, which would cast a debuff on yourself, which would incapacitate the next target that hit the Warlock with the melee.
Dude, I fucking love this ability. Because if you saw that the fucking Warlock pop this shit, you casted Spell Reflect, and you could reflect their own Blood Horror back onto them, man. Like, it was the best fucking ability ever. Like, I forgot that for... Dude, I haven't even thought about that ever since I did it. Like, that was so fucking good, man.
Attack for 4 seconds. So, nowhere near as good as the broken Blood Fear, and Blizzard went very far in the other direction of not allowing any classes to have instant cast CCs without long cooldowns in the future.
Yeah.
And at number 1, we have Shadow of Death, a Death Knight talented ability from early Wrath of the Lich King, which was only in the game for a single patch. Definitely the shortest amount of time.
Now, this worked. I don't know if he's going to say this, but I'm going to say it. This ability, if this ability had like a thing, you could cast a spell with this guy and you would explode, and you would explode yourself and you would do damage to everything around you. If you were doing an arena match and you casted the explosion ability and you killed yourself, but you killed the opposing player, you would win the game. It was so fucking broken.
Time and ability was removed for being too powerful.
Yeah.
So, what did the ability do? Well, if the Death Knight died, they came back to life as a ghoul for 45 seconds.
And they also didn't lose
durability. And in Wrath of the Lich King, Death Knights used to have this ability to raise other party members as ghouls after they died, before they were just given a normal battle res, which gave them their own little ghoul action bar and allowed them to do some decent damage for a bit.
This was really cool.
It was kind of like playing a hunter's pet with its own set of abilities and cooldowns. And since Death Knights would just gain this ability passively when they died, it allowed basically any Death Knight who took this talent to stay in the fight and keep performing raid mechanics after they normally would be dead.
And by the way, these things actually did a lot of damage. It wasn't like, it just a little slippy slappity. And no, these did real, like, fucking big dick damage. Like, they were basically like it was like having level 75 warrior attacking you. Like an entire other class, like a level 75 warrior attacking you.
And not doing any DPS. And it also allowed Death Knights to just tank mechanics, which would normally kill the raid, because they can come back as ghouls and help out anyway.
Yep.
It also worked in arenas for some reason, where Death Knights were already the most powerful class ever added to the game.
Yeah.
And if you did manage to kill the overpowered early Wrath Death Knight, they came back as a ghoul for 45 seconds to finish you off anyway.
Yep.
So the ability was very powerful, so they actually nerfed it mid-patch to reduce the duration from 45 seconds to 25 seconds. Before then, just removing the ability with the first major patch in 3.1.
They took it out super
They
early.
also nerfed a whole bunch of the other Death Knight abilities because they were very overpowered in early Wrath. But most of the abilities still stayed in the game in just nerfed versions.
Yeah.
Shadow of Death was one of the ones that was just straight up removed rather than trying to balance out an ability.
See, I thought it was a cool ability. Like, the thing is, like, Blizzard put it in the game because it sounded really cool. Like, early Wrath of the Lich King Death Knights were a badass class to play. They were a really fun class to play. All things considered, Definitely a fun class to play, but it was just too overpowered, man. It was just too broken. Like, it's one of those things, like, it sounds really cool, and it is really cool, like, in a vacuum, but, like, whenever other classes don't have the abilities to counter it, there's just nothing you can do.
Allowed them to self-res every time they died.
True hero class? Yeah, they certainly were.
Like reincarnation. So, for being in the game for only one patch, and being removed for being powerful, yes, there have been other abilities that only existed in the game for the single patch that just weren't as good. This is why Shadow of Death takes the #1 spot on this list.
It was broken.
All right, and that's the list.
Absolutely.
Are there any other abilities that were
broken.
super powerful and removed from the game quickly that I may have missed? If so, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments, as well as ideas for future videos just like this one. And also, did you know, fun fact, only 35.7% of people who watch these videos are subscribed to the channel?
What? Only 35%? What? Let's make it 36. Here, watch the video. Give him a like. Give him a sub. Sub to his fucking channel. It's a good video, man. It definitely was. It's like, this was fucking amazing. Like, some of these abilities were so fucking good, man. Sorry, Asmongold, I don't click links. Oh, okay. So yeah, like, I don't know. Like, it's crazy to see, like, all of the old abilities in the game. Like, I think for me, Void Tendrils,
you dealt.
I like the idea of Void Tendrils. Unleash Lightning, I thought was trash because it was just like you can cast and move. Clash was just like, it's okay, I guess. Symbiosis, I thought was really, really cool. I wish Blizzard still had that in the game. Gladiator's Resolve, like Gladiator Stance, was really cool too. I really like that. Dematerialize was just absolute garbage. I hated this ability. It's complete skillless ability. Let's see here. This Prismatic Crystal I thought was really fun. Aspect of the Fox was just not very good. Blood Fear theoretically sounds cool, but in realistic, like, it's too fucking strong. Like, it was just way too fucking strong. And this was just fucking disgusting. Like, this was just absolutely fucking disgusting. And there's no other word that you can possibly use for it.